Sunday to you all. Today is worthy of celebration. Palm Sunday. We love Palm Sunday. We are Christians after all, in case any of you have forgotten, because we don't focus on that. We focus on the interaction of the divine in all of life. But we, as it speaks to in the unity principles, and as unity teaching speaks to, we follow the teachings of Jesus the Christ every single day. We just don't join our fellow Christians in specific ceremony unless it's truly a day of celebration of a life of a man who changed the world. So Palm Sunday celebrates the fulfillment of a prophecy. The prophecy of a coming of a king. After the return from exile around the time of 520 BC to 480 BC, the words of the prophet Zechariah were written. Zechariah ministered to a small group of Jews who had returned to Judah to rebuild the temple and the nation. But the work on the temple had stalled, and the people were neglecting their service to God. Zechariah, like other prophets of his time, encouraged the people to finish rebuilding the temple. And it was Zechariah's visions that gave the people hope. He told the people of a future king who would one day establish a kingdom, an eternal kingdom. Recorded in Scripture, it states in Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, "Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Boy, my allergies have kicked in big time. I love spring. So the Jewish people believed. They believed the words of the prophets at the core of their being. They put great faith into the words and the stories and the visions that were shared. And it was in this way, in remembering the words of the prophets and the stories that they told, that they would recognize when the prophecy came true, when the future had unfolded as in the vision. So remember that. Because now we're going to fast forward and we're moving into the ministry of Jesus. The time when his ministry of 3 years is coming to a close. We all know what Holy Week is about. We've been through this story before. And in Matthew chapter 21, verses 1 through 5, the scriptures record the fulfillment of Zechariah's prophecy. It goes like this. It's titled, "Jesus Comes to Jerusalem as King." As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there, with her colt by her side. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone were to ask you anything, tell them that the Lord has need of them, and he will send them right away." This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. "Say to daughter Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, on the colt, the foal of a donkey." So there's a number of things going on here that are important to recognize. Jesus chose the humblest of beasts. The donkey was an animal used by common people, servants. It was only kings who may have a horse. And so the donkey represents one of the people. Metaphysically, it also tells us, based on what we know to be true about young colts, is that Jesus rose above. He overcame the animal nature of human beings. He gained mastery over the animal instinct and desires of the human self. Jesus was a great teacher. He was the type of teacher that taught by example and used object lessons that we refer to in youth ministry. When you use a physical, tangible item to display what you're trying to convey. And so here he was, riding on an untamed, formerly unridden, wild animal, ready to buck a man off at any given throw. But did that happen to Jesus? You all know the story. No, it's not in there. As in many stories in scriptures, there is wisdom to be gained by these stories. So this story is an example for our lives today that we too are to ride the animal inside of ourselves, to know that we have an animalistic nature and that we are capable of taming the animalistic thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. Once we recognize that this animal exists and we allow it to have its needs fulfilled, we can also use the power, the divine power of will, to master it. So we can use the wisest choice we can in whatever circumstances we find ourselves to overcome the animal instinct within ourselves. We are to know that we can have victory in taming our own animalistic nature. We do not have to stand under our animal natures and allow it to trample us, being walked on, being a victim. We have power and dominion over the animal side of our experience of the human being. So once you recognize that what the animal within is telling you, what lessons it's trying to teach you, what insight it's giving you for your life, and you meet the needs that are being expressed to be called and cared for, you overcome the beast with the wisdom of your innate divinity. I'm sure many of you have had this experience. You just didn't make the parallel of overcoming the beast. So let's also consider the property owner. Someone owned that little donkey and colt. And back in those days, it was probably a highly valued, prized possession. What do you think the financial value of this animal would be in a culture 2,000 plus years ago? Consider, what did you pay for your car? In today's value, monetary value, this animal was a prize of great worth.
$83.49. I did the calculations up here.
Thank you. It's a good thing you teach music, not math. So in many stories of the gospel, it states, if anyone should ask what you're doing, respond by saying, the Lord has need. The Lord has need. Who would so freely give away such a valuable prized possession as this donkey and say, oh yeah, go ahead, take it away, not knowing when it would be returned or if ever? Would you give away your most prized possession? Would you give away your house, your car, your home, your money, your ego? These are things we get to consider. Metaphysically, we know that Lord also references law, universal law. And so when we're told that universal law has need of something in order to fulfill the law, we can see that it is part of the divine flow. It is a part of the divine nature, divine activity of the universe, unfolding, expanding. It's God at work. So, can you overcome your own animalistic nature in order to develop your Christ presence? Unity principle number 2 states that we are all the Christ. Each one of us has the divine spark of the Christ presence within. It is up to us to nurture that flame, to nurture that Christ presence, to utilize the wisdom of it, and to overcome. So the story continues. In Matthew chapter 21, verses 9 through 11, it says that on this day, a man appears to the people in his spiritual nature as the Messiah. The crowds went ahead of him, and those who followed shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heaven!" And when Jesus entered into Jerusalem, the whole city stirred and asked, "Who is this?" And the crowds answered, "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee." And so it's the story of the triumphant entry of Jesus into the city. But what is also important to know is that long before this day, Jesus made a conscious choice. He made a conscious choice to live in alignment with the truth of God he recognized within his being. He made a conscious choice to trust in God above all other things. And he made a conscious choice to live in alignment with that oneness of God. He knew that the Father and he were one. He lived it. And that's why he is one of the prime examples centuries later. He learned the difference between the voices in himself, the animal voice, the ego voice, and the voice of God. We all have an animal voice, we all have an ego voice, and we all have the voice of God. He learned to tell the difference. We tell ourselves, it's difficult to know the difference between these voices. How do I recognize my guidance? How do I act in alignment with truth? We tell ourselves this story. We tell ourselves that it's hard to release the cherished longings of the human mind and heart to a higher wisdom that is love. We tell ourselves this. But it's a lie. It is a lie we tell ourselves so that we feel better about who we are today. It's a lie we tell ourselves so that we don't have to rise up. It's a lie that we tell ourselves so we can play small, so that we can hide our light under the bushel basket. It's a lie. Jesus entered into Jerusalem not to fulfill his human will. He entered into Jerusalem to fulfill this prophecy and to fulfill his divine destiny as a symbol of the Christ presence that each and every one of us have within. He was not known for making choices on personal comfort. He chose so that he could teach a lesson. He chose an untamed, untrained donkey colt because he was willing to take a risk for what he believed to be the will of God. we too must be willing to take a risk, to stand up for what we believe to be true, for what we believe is right. The Christ nature within each and every one of us is calling us to do exactly that. And so I ask you now, are you ready to accept the truth of the indwelling Christ and to live from that level of consciousness, from the Christ awareness? It's a choice we each get to make every single day, multiple times in the day. We get to choose. Do we want to be our animalistic self, or do we want to be the Christ presence in the world that we know we can be? And so I ask you, are you willing? And if yes, then rise up as we sing Hosanna.